Hey, 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 you're tuned in to Robbie Shorter's The Thing About, a smooth podcast for the rough world we live in. Now available anywhere you can get your podcasts, to include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Well, howdy diddly do. How are y'all doing today? Yeah, it's me again, Robbie Shorter, here with another exciting episode of Robbie Shorter's The Thing About, where I bitch, moan, and groan and give you my 2 cents for however much that's worth about various issues plaguing society, according to me, because I'm always right. Welcome in. So, as you saw by the title of today's episode, we're going to be talking about a movie I recently saw. It is Joker Folie Deux. Now, before I get into this, I just want to say I'm actually kind of fucking annoyed right now. This is technically the 6th time I have had to record this goddamn episode because, let's see. The first time I forgot to hit the record button. I hit the record button on this other fancy schmancy device that captures both visual and audio. So if I wanted to give you guys like a visual podcast, then I could do that. But nah, I'm not going. We haven't made it that far in our relationship yet, so slow down. But I forgot to hit the record button on the actual audio interface, which is, as you could tell by the name of the device, is the interface that captures the audio. So yeah, I goofed on that. The second time, I got interrupted because some jackass thought it would be a great idea to knock on the door, even though the flashing light outside was clearly flashing, saying recording in progress, recording in progress. Some people just can't get the memo. Reading is not as fundamental as we think it is these days. So yeah, there's that. The third time, really the third, fourth, and fifth time I recorded, it was capturing something, but I could not actually access the audio file. And if I can't access the audio file, I can't listen to it. And if I can't listen to it, I can't edit it. And if I can't edit it to make it sound all nice and purty for y'all, I cannot publish it. So that is why there was a bit of a delay between episode 1 and episode 2. So forgive me, but nevertheless, here we are. This is episode 2 of Robbie Shorter's The Thing About. Let's just dive right into this. Joker 2, that's what I'm going to call it. The official title is Joker Folie Deux. I'm just going to call it Joker 2 to simplify it. And I didn't like it. It was a disappointment from the original film. Thank you and goodbye. All right. I'll stick around a bit longer and actually give you some context as to why I feel the way I do. So this movie, Joker Folie Deux, is a sequel to the 2019 film that came out, simply titled Joker. In that movie, it starred Joaquin Phoenix, who portrayed a man by the name of Arthur Fleck. Who was Arthur Fleck? Arthur Fleck is a depressed, deranged, mentally ill, lowly man living in the most corrupt piece of shit city imaginable. No, I'm not talking about Detroit. I'm talking about the fictional city of Gotham. And he's just doing his best to try and survive while taking care of his elderly, sickly, also mentally deranged mother. And I really enjoyed that movie. I gave it a 10 out of 10 because I appreciated the excellent acting. I appreciated the cinematography. I appreciated the story. We got to go on this epic, not really a hero's journey per se, but a villain's journey, I guess, exploring how Arthur Fleck went from being just this, depressed, miserable, mentally ill man to being this deranged, psychotic killer, but this confident and powerful deranged psychotic killer, aka the Clown Prince of Crime, aka the Joker, who is, as you all, if you haven't been living under a rock for the past 60 years, is Batman's arch nemesis. But yeah, I loved that about this movie. And just, this isn't going to be a play-by-play as far as, what happens in every scene of the movie. This is not going to be a full movie review. If you want that, there are plenty of YouTubers out there who can satisfy you. What I'm here is to just get straight to the goody bits. And that is, I appreciated how the movie kicks off, or I guess the movie really starts to get in gear. And again, I'm talking about the original Joker 2019. Arthur is on the subway. He's all decked up in his clown makeup and clown gear because he works as a clown for hire for some sleazy shitball company. He's on the train, just minding his own business. Oh, if you hadn't noticed, spoilers, heavy fucking spoilers. He's on the train, minding his own business, and then out of nowhere, these three drunken, pretty rich white boys start hassling him. Arthur has a condition in which he tends to laugh hysterically when he's in very nerve-wracking situations. That's how he responds to nervousness. So he starts laughing hysterically, and they start singing, "Ooh, here come the clowns." And then after that, things escalate. They take his stuff. They start to rough him up and beat on him. And Arthur very reasonably comes to the conclusion that the only thing to do is to pop a cap in each of their asses with the gun he got from his fellow sleazy shitball coworker, Randall. So, he kills these three dudes, runs away into some shithole bathroom, and breaks out into this interpretive dance, which I thought actually really worked. And then from there, the movie is just about Arthur slowly but surely starting to embrace his psychosis and embrace becoming this transformation that is into the Joker. Now, I gave that movie a 10 out of 10 because I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. I thought it was an excellent film. Now, in 2024, we get the follow-up to that movie, which is Joker Folie, or Joker 2. This movie pretty much picks up right where the previous movie left, where Arthur is now in prison for the crimes he has committed. The crimes being, well, let's see what Arthur's body count is. He murdered the three gentlemen on the subway, so that's 3. He murdered his coworker, the one that gave him the gun and ultimately cost him his job when he got fired, so that's 4. He murdered his mother in the hospital, so that's 5. He smothered her to death. And then he murdered Murray Franklin, who is a popular late-night talk show host, portrayed by Robert De Niro. Mwah, chef's kiss. Excellent choice there. But yeah, he just straight up shoots him in the head at the end of the film. So yeah, on live national television. So cool. So Arthur now, in Folie à Deux, has to atone for his sins, I guess, and be held accountable. And this movie tries to do so many things. It tries to do everything so well that it ultimately can't seem to do anything very well at all. So here's what's going on. This movie can't seem to decide what it wants to be at any given moment. It doesn't know if it wants to be a psychological thriller or if it wants to be a twisted love story between Arthur Fleck and Lady Gaga's character, Lee Quinn, a.k.a. Harley Quinn, a.k.a. the Joker's girlfriend. It doesn't know if it wants to be a courtroom drama. And, well, it definitely knows that it wants to be a fucking musical because there are no shortage of musical numbers in this film. And I don't know if there's some kind of weird bullshit arbitrary rule where a movie has to have a certain number of musical scenes in it to be considered a musical, but this movie definitely well surpassed that minimum. In fact, it gets to be too goddamn much. Now, let me just preface by saying this. I am not anti-musical. I like musicals. I think musicals and having musical numbers in movies can be an excellent and very creative way to express how a character is feeling at any given time, given the situation they are in. Point in case, Timothée Chalamet and his interpretation of Willy Wonka in the musical movie Wonka. I loved it. Hugh Jackman as P.T. Barnum. And of course that delicious man meat, Zac Efron, and of course that the beautiful and ever so talented Zendaya in The Greatest Showman. That was an excellent movie. I enjoyed it more than most people. Fucking even Johnny Depp and Sweeney Todd, Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Not the best musical in the world, but certainly not the worst. I enjoyed it for what it was worth. And then, of course, The Color Purple we got in 2023, right around the same time Wonka came out, actually. I enjoyed that. Musicals are a great medium to express how a character is feeling beyond just the stereotypical dialogue, monologue, whatever the fuck. The problem with this movie is that it overdoes it and it actually takes away from the experience. A musical is supposed to add to the story, to add to the experience. But the problem with this movie, Joker 2, is that it overdoes it. So what you have is a musical that really seems like it doesn't even want to be a musical, but it just has to because Lady Gaga is in it, and why the fuck not? And it ultimately doesn't do that good of a job, and it gives us way too many musical numbers to compensate for the fact that there is no actual story here. So let's go back a little bit. I told you that this movie wanted to be one part twisted love story. So, at the start of this movie, we have Arthur, who is in prison, and his character has essentially been reverted back to what it was in the first movie. He is a depressed, lonely, miserable, mentally ill piece of crap. And what I thought, I was already not pleased by that, but here's what I was thinking. Okay, I was thinking, all right, yeah, they seem to have reverted Arthur's character, but, here comes Harley Quinn, or at least Lady Gaga's interpretation of Harley Quinn, and she's going to act as kind of this sick, perverted catalyst. She's going to do what she can to try and get his mojo back, to try and get him to become the Joker that he was at the end of the first film in 2019. That's the angle I thought this movie was going at. And for a while, or at least for a little bit, it seemed very much so. Like that was the direction this movie was going in as far as the whole twisted love story concept. But yeah, Lee Quinn, that's the name of the character in this movie. She absolutely adores this man. She adores the Joker. She reveres him. She worships the very ground that he walks upon. And I'm thinking, okay, she's fucked up. But it's going to take an equally fucked up person to try and get Arthur to go back to being the equally fucked up person that he was as the Joker. So I thought she was going to inspire him to go back to his roots, I guess. And that does happen-ish in a way. But by the end of the movie, it completely fucks itself over and does away with that entirely. So that fails miserably, and I'll explain why in a bit. Then you have the psychological thriller aspect, and I'm actually going to explain them both, the psychological thriller and the courtroom drama, because they both kind of blend into each other. The psychological thriller of this movie, or what it aspires to try and be, is the fact that we don't know which Arthur we're getting. Are we getting Arthur Fleck, or are we getting the Joker? And the reason we say that is because in the movie, bleeding into now the courtroom drama aspect of the movie, Arthur's defense attorney is trying to make the case that there is a very distinct personality difference, dare I say a split personality difference, between Arthur Fleck and the Joker. The Joker is the one responsible for murdering those pricks on the subway and for shooting Murray Franklin in the head and for smothering his mother to death and for, a litany of other crimes he may have committed in between now and then. That was really the Joker's doing. Arthur Fleck is just a poor, beaten down, mentally ill, horribly depressed man that is just trying to cope with living in a world that quite frankly could give less of a shit if he lives or dies. So, in order to cope with all of that trauma and all of that pain and all of that grief that he's had to deal with for his entire life, he had to create an alternative ego, an alter ego, a new personality to help him cope with all of that trauma. And what does that amalgamation of him coping with all this trauma look like? The Joker. That's why he became the Joker, to cope with the trauma of being Arthur Fleck. That is the argument that was being made in the movie by the defense attorneys into the courtroom procedure. And that worked for me for a time. That actually really did work, and that got me interested. That got the juices flowing for me. But by the end of this movie, you're going to ask yourself a pretty serious question. And it's a question that you really should never have to ask yourself, that no one should have to ask, especially coming hot off the heels of a movie that made $1 billion fucking dollars at the box office. And here is that question for you, dear listeners. What was the point? By the time you get to the end of this movie, Joker Folie à Deux, you're going to ask yourself, what was the point? What was the point in going on this entire journey? And I'll tell you why. Heavy spoilers. If you simply must go see Folie à Deux, go see it. I don't recommend it. Wait for it to come out on stream. But if you must, you might want to bail. You might want to pause this and come back later because I'm about to spill the tea. You ready? Okay, here we go. The movie ends. This is pain. This is agonizing just to even talk about it. And this is the 5th time I've had to. The 3rd act basically kicks off with the Arthur has to make his final case. He fires his defense attorney and he decides to represent himself on his own behalf. And Arthur pretty much gives up the whole fucking game. You remember when I was telling you earlier that this was kind of supposed to be a psychological thriller, or that's partially what this movie wanted to be, where you didn't know if you were getting Arthur or the Joker? Well, Arthur pretty much comes out and throws cold fucking water on that whole defense. He sits down on a stool in front of the jurors, and he basically says that there is no Joker. There is only Arthur Fleck, and there is not a distinct difference between the Joker and Arthur Fleck. They are both one and the same, and that he doesn't want to be the Joker anymore. He just wants to be Arthur. He just wants to try and live a somewhat normal life, as normal as it can be, given the fact that he is, for all intents and purposes, a serial killer. So, yeah. And then after he delivers that little truth bomb, he also confesses to murdering his mother. Nobody knew about that until right now, or during that particular scene. So, yeah, Arthur pretty much gives up, blows a giant fucking hole in his defense. And Lee Quinn is understandably quite upset by this, and she gets herself up, along with a few other acolytes who are sitting in the benches, watching the whole trial unfold, and they leave. And, so that's pretty much that. Then later, after the courtroom is bombed, Arthur escapes, runs away. Eventually, he finds Lee standing atop of the stairs from the first movie. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, just watch the first movie. You'll understand. Apparently, that was deemed as a place of religious sacredness. I don't know. Weird. But in any case, he meets her at the steps that he was dancing on in the previous film. And she essentially breaks up with him. She says that all we had was the fantasy, and that I'm in love with a Joker. I'm not in love with you. And since you have made it clear that you don't want to be the Joker anymore, that you want to be Arthur Fleck, and I don't love Arthur Fleck, I love the Joker, we're done. So she breaks up with his ass, leaving our boy Arthur even more heartbroken, miserable, and depressed than he already was. Arthur then agrees to go back into custody, or not even agrees to, he just gives up and allows himself to be arrested and thrown right back in prison. The movie ends the same fucking way it started. He's back in prison, he's back to being depressed and miserable, but here's the kicker. The very last scene of the movie, one of the guards says that Arthur has a visitor. Arthur gets up, walks down the hallway to meet his visitor. Before he gets to his final destination, he is stopped by one of the other inmates. The inmate tells him, ask Arthur if he has time to hear a joke, and Arthur agrees. And essentially, I don't remember the nuts and bolts of the joke, but it basically ends with this weird inmate telling Arthur's own joke, and then he follows that up by stabbing him to death 12, 15 times in the stomach. And, so Arthur gets shanked to death by another inmate, and as he is lying down in a pool of his own blood, slowly but surely bleeding out, ever so faintly in the background, the inmate that shanked him is taking a piece of glass or whatever the hell he used to, unalive Arthur. He takes that and he slowly starts to cut the corners of his mouth into this disgusting, sinister smile that we all know and love. the Joker to have. So I guess this is supposed to be the film's artsy fartsy way of saying that, hey, you know what? Arthur was never really meant to be the Joker. He was just meant to be kind of a template, kind of the foundation for which somebody even more fucked up in the head than he is to come along and take up the mantle of being the Joker. So if you're into that kind of, I guess, deep philosophical, analytical thought, then sure, I guess you might find the ending to be quite poetic. I did not. I found it to be bullshit, and I didn't like it, and I thought it was a complete 180 from the movie we got a few years ago. Here's the thing about this movie. If you watch this movie with no prior knowledge of the first one, then chances are you're probably not going to hate it. You might actually, dare I say, like it. The problem is that most people who are watching this movie, Joker Folie, saw the first movie, saw how wonderful that was, came into this one with the expectation that this was going to be a worthy sequel, and it was not. In fact, not only is it not a worthy sequel in my opinion, but this movie actually goes out of its way, I think, to troll you for having the audacity to like the first film. This movie actually feels like it exists to punish you for liking the first film, because Joker or Arthur Fleck never truly goes back to being the Joker. He is always kind of in this perpetual state of being a depressed piece of shit with moments sprinkled in of being the Joker. But then, like I said, by the end of the movie, you're going to ask yourself, what was the point? This movie essentially undoes everything that happened in the first movie. Not only does it undo what happened in the first movie, but the courtroom scenes essentially just kind of rehash what happened in the first movie. That's basically what it is. I mean, granted, the acting is superb and whatnot, and I very much enjoyed that. But if you really pay attention to the courtroom scenes in Joker Folie, they really are just a elaborate retelling of what happened in the first movie. And I am of the opinion, folks, that if you watch a movie and the movie itself has to go back and make you reminisce about how awesome the previous films in the series were, then it raises a very obvious question. Why bother watching this fucking movie? So, yeah, that is the unenviable position you will find yourself in. Wow, I was just very disappointed by this movie. Now, is this the worst movie I have ever seen? Absolutely not. This is definitely the most disappointing movie I have seen in the year 2024, but it is not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's not Madam Web, and I'll have a video or I'll have an episode for you on that real soon, folks. But no, not the worst movie, but it is definitely the most disappointing movie because it just... And here's the thing about the musicals. Like I said, I don't mind. I like musical movies, but this movie just takes it too fucking far. And I think part of the reason for that is, one, Todd Phillips, the man who directed this film and also directed the previous one, he had no prior experience working with musicals, and it fucking shows. And then two, I think part of the reason we just get saturated by just musical number after musical number after musical number after musical fucking number is because there is no story to tell. There's no actual story here. The story is basically, you're a piece of shit for liking the first film. Let's remind you of how awesome that film was, and let's punish you for having the audacity to think about how awesome that first film was, and here you go. So it got to be a bit too much. And like I said, musicals are supposed to complement the overall story. Every time we went into a musical number in this fucking movie, it took me out of the experience. It actually detracted from the experience for me, because maybe after the first one, maybe two or three musical numbers are like, okay, this kind of works. Don't do any more, but this kind of works. But they had to do more. They had to do a fourth one, and then a fifth, and then a sixth, and then a seventh, and then an eighth. And by the time we got to the end of the movie and the last musical number, I was like, enough. Stop fucking singing. Shut the fuck up. Just act. No more musical numbers. Just give me the movie that I wanted. We didn't want a musical. We didn't ask for a musical. We didn't need for this to be a musical. Whoever decided to make this movie a musical, you deserve to be, you deserve to have gonorrhea. I'm just going to put it that way. Just fuck you, seriously. Why would you fucking do this? This movie did not need to be a musical by any stretch of the imagination. And if it was going to be a musical, it could have done a hell of a lot better job. And here's the thing about the musical numbers in this movie. They all happen in Arthur's imagination. And as we know, Arthur's imagination is about as, reliable as my first fucking car when it had 197,000 miles on it. Not particularly reliable. And these musical numbers all take place in kind of these weird, imaginative fever dreams. They don't even actually happen in the scenes themselves. They happen in Arthur's head. It's all in Arthur's head. So it really makes you question, like, why even bother doing this? Like, there are way more interesting things you could be doing with this concept. I liked how they did the musical number in the courtroom scene. Again, all entirely in Arthur's imagination, but I like that. And then they just had to keep going and going and going and going with the fucking musicals, and it got to be too much. I got irritated, and I just wanted them to stop, but they didn't stop. Oh, they didn't stop. So, I was not a fan of the musicals in this movie. It didn't need to be a musical. I think if they had just stuck with the first three concepts, the psychological thriller, the courtroom drama, and the twisted love story, and they actually had a payoff, a really good, satisfying ending, you could have had yourself a worthy sequel here. But instead, what we get is a shitty love story, a lousy courtroom drama, a shitty psychological thriller, and an obnoxious fucking musical, a very obnoxious musical. And again, I don't know if there's some kind of a law where you have to have a certain number of musical scenes in your goddamn movie for it to be considered a musical, but this way over fucking did it. It was way too much. So yeah, couldn't stand it. Can't go any further. With that being said, my final verdict for Joker Folie à Deux, or Joker 2, is going to have to be, I'm going to be somewhat merciful and give it a 5 out of 10. I was talking to another friend of mine, and he says he's going to give it a -5, and I'm like, okay, that's a little harsh, but I can't say I completely disagree with his rationale. But I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because, again, the acting is superb, just like it was in the first film. They did very much carry that over to this one. The cinematography was excellent, just as it was in the first film. But the story, or the lack thereof, killed this movie. And then what put the final nail in the coffin were all the goddamn musical numbers. Maybe it was because Lady Gaga was in it, so they felt obligated to make this a musical. Maybe it was because some artsy-fartsy liberal with their fine arts degree thought, hey, let's take this cool, edgy approach, and instead of, making it exactly the same as the first movie and actually evolving Arthur's character as the Joker, let's just go back to making him a depressed piece of shit that sing-songs his way to going right back to being a depressed piece of shit and ultimately murdered in jail. Cool. Whoever made these executive decisions, you ought to be left to lie out bleeding on the moonlight, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, not a great movie. Don't see it. Don't spend your money on it in theaters. Wait for it to come out and stream, if you absolutely must see this movie. Otherwise, I would just watch the first movie and pretend like this one doesn't exist. Cool. All right. I cannot bring myself to talk about this movie any further. So with that, folks, I'm just going to call it a day for this particular episode of The Thing About. Thanks for tuning in as always. Sorry again for the delay getting this out to you, but ready or not, here it comes. Hope you've enjoyed listening to me bitch, moan, and groan about this movie. And I'll see you in the next episode, folks. Have a wonderful day. Get your pets spayed or neutered if you haven't already. Keep the pet population in check. And remember, Election Day is fast approaching. If you're not registered to vote, what are you doing with your life? Please go get registered to vote. And early voting has already started. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. Vote, vote, vote. See you in the next episode, folks. Bye-bye.